a bit rate of like 16 bits per second, and they weren't about to start uploading megabytes of images over that. They had to wait for the Tianwen spacecraft in orbit to shift into an orbit which would pass over the landing sites like once every day. After a few days, we did get to see a few images. This is obviously from the top of the rover, showing the solar panels unfurled, the low gain antenna there, and that circular feature there, that's a thermal ballast. It's like it contains a hydrocarbon in there, which has a freezing point roughly around the temperature of Mars. So it warms up during the day and cools down at night, and it tends to stay around that freezing point. And then there was this monochrome image supplied by one of the hazard avoidance cameras on the rover itself, looking down the ramp onto the surface of Mars. And they took about a week, waiting for the data to come back. They got the data, they modeled the surface, and then they actually built a simulated version in the lab just to make sure that the orientation that it would go down the rails just fine. Apparently, the suspension system used by Xeron has some extra active components, so they can raise the front and the rear of the rover independently if necessary. But yeah, this is a really cool animation showing the descent onto the surface, and of course we get to see the lander that it came down on. And I think it's worth noting, we haven't had a lander that's been delivered to the surface of Mars like this, as in a rocket-powered platform with a ramp. If you look at Curiosity and Perseverance, they used the Sky Crane. Opportunity and Spirit had this big sort of bouncy ball thing. This is a single rocket engine landing on the surface of Mars, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, around the same time, Tianwen-1 was able to return this image of the landing site. Now, Tianwen-1 is very much a science satellite. It is doing right, and as it's working as a relay, because it's had to set its orbit to synchronize with the rover, it's sort of limiting its science gathering capabilities. But anyway, on the left, this is before, on the right is this after, and you see 3 locations marked on Mars. At the top, you have the lander showing an interesting bird pattern around it. There's 2 objects there because one is the lander and the other is the rover. Below that, they have the aeroshell and the parachute marked. And to the southwest of that, that is where the heat shield landed. Of course, NASA has its own imaging capabilities. It has the Martian Constant Orbiter with high-rise camera, and that's able to get resolutions down to like half a meter or less. In this image, you can very clearly see the lander and the rover as 2 separate entities. Depending upon how you process this, there's evidence of the ramps being visible on the right side of this image facing most east. And yes, the burnt star is a very interesting shape, and I have a lot of questions about this. It shows us a generally dark area with 2 light areas heading to the north and south. And this is sort of very similar in some ways to what we saw for Perseverance's landing, but that was via a sky crane, and its shape was due to having rockets that were firing from the top of the rover to the left and right, and those formed 2 distinct burn marks, and then along the middle was a stagnation zone where the air or the gases didn't flow quite as fast. But Xeron's lander only had a single engine, and from this image there was nothing getting to the wheel. There were 4 legs, but if the 4 legs were responsible for causing these 2 bright lobes, how did that work? Why didn't we see a cross-shaped pattern? So I think what this is a post-landing event. After they land, they high-pressure propellant tanks, and they just want to vent, and the vents just happen to be located out of the site. These the site are 90 degrees away from the landing ramp, so we're not going to get in the way of that. I think that's what's going on here. Also, if you look at this image of the lander, this is sort of linked up with the reaction control thrusters, so those are sitting along the edge. And if you imagine when this is going down, there's an aeroshell at the top of that and a heat shield underneath, and that's where the jet will out through the aeroshell so that they can control the descent. So it's conceivable that they just depressurize the system by firing those engines as well, and those are pointed at 90 degrees to that ramp and exactly along the line of those burn stars. Also, this image gives us an amazing view of the crater which was made underneath the lander due to the rocket exhaust from that main engine solidly touching down on Mars. Now, this is a much deeper crater than we've seen on other planetary landers, but really it's the first time we've seen it underneath a Mars lander which has landed on a rocket. For comparison, the Chang'e missions to the moon, they didn't leave crater near this opening. So that's because they shut their engine down about 15 feet off the surface and then fell to the surface. They didn't do that on Mars. They powered all the way to the surface. But also there's a strong effect whereby a rocket in a vacuum expands out very quickly, whereas a rocket in an atmosphere, even an atmosphere as thin as that of Mars, will be collimated and form into a jet that lowers into the surface much more efficiently than it would on the Moon. This is one of the things that leads to the sky crane, which, when you think about it, sounds a bit ridiculous, but actually, you look at the science, it's the next way to do it. There's another little engineering feature here. There's a little cylindrical object that sort of hangs out from underneath the lid there. That is like the black box that was there in case of an accident. They had a team build this, and you can get an idea how big it is by this photo of a guy working on a bulk train. They shot this out of the planet to make sure it could survive any reasonable impacts, and that was there. If it was a crash, it would be able to transmit some parts of the telemetry so that they could perhaps have a better chance next time. But yeah, they didn't need it. After a while, they did also start sharing engineering camera views. This is, of course, parachute deployment, which NASA didn't really capture camera views of parachute deployment until Perseverance. Yeah, I can see why these days cameras are so much cheaper, so it makes sense to capture this data and share it for improvements in future flights. This is the aeroshell getting popped off. You can see the parachute cooling it away. And of course, once this goes away, the vehicle starts to go into powered descent mode, uses its rocket propulsion. It has many sensors, it has cameras, radar, and other onboard image processing looking for a landing site. They chose the plane of Utopia Planitia because it was pretty well known to be a pretty, an area with a lot of flat spaces, and therefore relatively easy to land on. It's believed that Utopia Planitia used to be a sea at some point in the past, or sites of an ancient shoreline at higher elevations, so this was probably underwater in the past. And this image here actually gives you a really good idea of the sort of quality of the surface here. This is also one of the sort of great images for the mission, as far as I'm concerned. NASA hasn't done this. They had to carry an extra camera and then set it down on the surface of the planet so that it could take a photo of the rover and the lander together. And this is great PR. This is a country that's absolutely understanding the prestige that it gained through communication of its spaceflight capabilities. And if you thought that dropping a camera on the surface of Mars to take a photo of your rover was cool, well, they dropped the camera off in deep space so it could take a photograph of the spacecraft in flight. Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission made extensive use of deployable cameras to get after the initial reconnaissance and photo opportunities.
I don't know how quick I made orbit. I mean, I didn't make orbit, but... It's gonna take 2 days before I hit the planet. That's funny.
Zhurong headed off south, and I think its main target was this one object in the distance, which is the aeroshell and the parachute attached to it. Again, this is a mission which is doing science, but part of that science is figuring out how best to land on Mars, and inspecting your hardware can provide all sorts of extra information on that front. And this stands in stark contrast to the more mature NASA program, where the engineering data which might get gained from analysing the parachute is outweighed by the fact that there's a small risk that the rover could get tangled in the parachute and lose the scientific value that the rover wants to bring from its analysis. But as of right now, Zhurong has continued moving and has just completed 1 kilometre. It's been moving about 10 metres per day. Now, the downsides of picking an easy place to land is that there's not actually much in the way of really interesting features that stand out. Again, this probably may well have been a seafloor in the past, but this is a mission that has got this ground penetrating radar which is looking down into the surface, and we're not getting the data back from that just yet. There's a lot of analysis that has to go into that. But also, Tianwen 1 is going to move to a new orbit soon, and it'll stop being able to continually service the rover. The rover has already exceeded its planned 90 days of operation, but I expect it will continue heading southward, possibly towards some distant peak or some other structure that is geologically interesting, and we'll see how far it gets. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.